Most people believe the rich are protected by cameras, guards, and massive gates. But sometimes the real danger is already sitting at the dinner table pretending everything is normal. On a cold Thursday night in Connecticut, wealthy politicians and business elites gathered inside the luxurious Whitmore mansion for an exclusive dinner party. Expensive champagne flowed, soft piano music filled the room, and servants moved silently between guests. Among them was Evelyn Carter, a quiet maid who had spent years learning how to stay invisible. Then one small mistake changed everything. As Evelyn served drinks, a glass slipped from her hand. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth, and the room instantly fell silent. Guests stared in disgust while Evelyn dropped to her knees, apologizing and trying desperately to clean the mess before billionaire Richard Whitmore reacted. But while reaching beneath the table for broken glass, Evelyn touched something hidden underneath. An envelope. When the wine loosened the tape holding it in place, several photographs slipped halfway out. The moment Evelyn saw the face in those photos, her blood ran cold. It was Laura Bennett, a former maid who had mysteriously disappeared 8 months earlier. Richard Whitmore had claimed Laura moved away to California, but the frightened, bruised woman in those photographs told a completely different story. Evelyn quickly shoved the photos back into the envelope. Then she looked up. Richard Whitmore was already staring directly at her. Not with anger, with fear. For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Then Richard calmly told Evelyn to clean herself up in the kitchen. His voice sounded polite, but his eyes carried a terrifying warning. Because in that moment, Evelyn realized the wine spill had not been the real accident that night. Finding those photographs was. Later that evening, while sitting alone at a bus stop, Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You should have kept your eyes down. At that moment, Evelyn understood something horrifying. Someone inside the Whitmore mansion already knew what she had seen, and they were willing to do anything to keep the secret buried.
Family dinners rarely felt normal. Richard Whitmore controlled every conversation at the table with the same authority he used in business meetings. Employees were expected to move silently around him because even small mistakes irritated him deeply. He rarely shouted, which somehow made him even more frightening. Richard preferred cold silence over loud anger. Whenever something displeased him, the entire atmosphere inside the mansion shifted instantly. Victoria Whitmore often looked nervous in her husband's presence, though she tried desperately to hide it. Evelyn noticed the small details others ignored. The way Victoria's hands trembled slightly whenever Richard questioned her in front of guests. The way she avoided eye contact during arguments. The way she quietly apologized for things that were clearly not her fault. There were nights Evelyn overheard muffled crying coming from Victoria's private sitting room long after midnight. Yet the following morning, Victoria always appeared downstairs perfectly composed beside her husband, as though nothing had happened at all. Then there was Ethan Whitmore. Unlike his father, Ethan lacked discipline completely. He was reckless, unpredictable, and increasingly unstable. Some nights, he returned home drunk shortly before sunrise while security guards quietly helped him inside through side entrances to avoid attention. Other nights, Evelyn heard violent arguments erupting between Ethan and Richard behind closed office doors. Furniture slammed against walls. Glass shattered. Once, Evelyn even witnessed Ethan storm through the kitchen with blood on his knuckles, while Richard calmly followed behind him, saying only one sentence. "You are becoming a liability." Employees inside the mansion whispered constantly about Ethan's gambling addiction. Drivers claimed he owed dangerous people enormous amounts of money. Housekeepers discovered hidden prescription bottles inside guest bathrooms after his parties. One security guard quietly mentioned that Ethan disappeared for days at a time before returning home looking exhausted and terrified. But no one dared discuss these things openly, because Richard Whitmore protected the family's reputation more aggressively than anything else in his life. And then there was Richard's private office. Located near the West Wing upstairs, the office remained locked almost every hour of the day. Only Richard carried the key personally. Even senior employees were forbidden from entering unless directly ordered. Evelyn cleaned every room inside the mansion except that office and the basement corridor below it. Occasionally, she noticed strange visitors arriving late at night and disappearing into Richard's office for hours, while security guards blocked nearby hallways. Politicians, lawyers, men in expensive suits carrying briefcases. Sometimes the meetings became heated enough that voices echoed through the walls. Once Evelyn passed by carrying laundry and heard Richard shouting loud enough to freeze her in place. "If this gets out, all of us are finished." The moment he noticed movement outside the door, the room went completely silent. Other strange things began happening more frequently in the weeks leading up to the charity dinner. Evelyn found partially burned papers inside one of the fireplaces while cleaning early one morning. Financial documents, legal forms, fragments of photographs. Another time, she discovered Victoria Whitmore sitting alone inside the dining room, staring blankly at an empty wine glass while mascara ran down her face. Victoria quickly wiped away her tears and forced a smile the second she realized Evelyn was watching. But perhaps the most disturbing moment came 3 nights before the annual Whitmore Charity Gala. Evelyn had stayed late cleaning the upstairs hallway when she heard someone crying softly behind Richard's locked office door. At first, she assumed it was Victoria, but then she heard a man's voice speaking quietly through the door. It was Ethan. "You promised me this would stay buried," he whispered. There was a long silence. Then Richard answered coldly, "It will, if everyone does exactly what they're told." Evelyn walked away immediately before they realized she was nearby. But for the rest of that night, one terrible feeling refused to leave her mind. Something inside the Whitmore mansion was beginning to fall apart. And then came the annual charity dinner. The night the drink spilled. That night, Evelyn Carter realized something horrifying. The wine spill had not exposed a secret by accident. Someone inside the Whitmore mansion already knew the truth was beginning to leak out. And from the moment Richard Whitmore saw those photographs in her hands beneath the dinner table, Evelyn unknowingly became part of a dangerous situation far bigger than she understood. The charity dinner continued almost normally after the incident, at least on the surface. Guests returned to their conversations. Waiters carried fresh drinks through the ballroom. Laughter slowly filled the room again, as if nothing unusual had happened. But Evelyn noticed details nobody else seemed to catch. Richard Whitmore barely touched his wine for the rest of the evening. His eyes constantly scanned the room. Twice he stepped away from the table to whisper privately with his attorney, Daniel Mercer, a sharp-faced man known for handling sensitive legal problems for wealthy clients. Every time Daniel glanced toward Evelyn, his expression hardened slightly, almost as though he were trying to decide how dangerous she truly was. Ethan Whitmore behaved strangely as well. Throughout dinner, he appeared restless, tapping his fingers aggressively against the table while avoiding eye contact with his father. At one point, Evelyn overheard Ethan mutter something quietly under his breath as Richard returned from another private conversation. "She knows now," Ethan whispered. Richard immediately shot him a warning look sharp enough to silence him instantly. Then there was Marcus Reed, the Whitmore family's longtime head of security. Marcus was a former military contractor who rarely smiled and monitored the mansion with unsettling intensity. Employees often joked that Marcus noticed everything happening inside the estate before it even happened. During the remainder of the dinner party, Evelyn caught him watching her repeatedly from different corners of the room. Not casually, carefully, like someone observing a threat. And suddenly, small things around the mansion began changing. As the night continued, several interior doors that normally remained open were quietly locked. Security cameras shifted positions toward employee hallways. Richard's office upstairs remained occupied long after guests began leaving. Around midnight, Evelyn passed near the kitchen corridor and overheard raised voices coming from inside the security room. "We should have handled this months ago," Ethan snapped angrily. "We are handling it," Richard replied coldly. Then came silence. The kind of silence that feels far more dangerous than shouting. Evelyn left the mansion shortly after 1 in the morning, feeling deeply unsettled. The streets outside were dark and nearly empty as she waited at the bus stop beneath freezing rain. For the first time since working at the Whitmore estate, she genuinely considered quitting. Whatever she had accidentally discovered clearly frightened Richard Whitmore enough to make powerful people nervous. And powerful people did dangerous things when they became desperate. Halfway through the bus ride home, Evelyn noticed the same black SUV behind them at 3 separate intersections. At first, she convinced herself it was coincidence. But when she finally stepped off near her apartment building, the SUV slowed briefly near the curb before continuing down the street without turning. That was the moment fear truly settled into her chest. Inside her apartment, Noah was already asleep on the couch beneath a blanket. Evelyn locked the door quietly and checked the windows twice before sitting down at the kitchen table, trying to process everything that had happened. Her hands still trembled slightly as she replayed the evening in her mind. Laura Bennett's bruised face in those photographs. Richard Whitmore's terrified expression. Ethan's nervous behavior. Marcus watching her from across the room. None of it felt accidental anymore. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. Evelyn hesitated before answering. For several seconds, she heard nothing except slow breathing on the other end of the line. Then the call disconnected. No words, just breathing. A few minutes later, another call came from a different block number. Again, silence. Again, breathing. This time the caller stayed on the line long enough for Evelyn to hear faint voices somewhere in the background before disconnecting abruptly. She barely slept that night. The following morning, things became even worse. When Evelyn returned to work, several employees were whispering nervously in the kitchen about police officers visiting the mansion years earlier after another maid disappeared unexpectedly. Unlike Laura Bennett, this woman's case had briefly become public because her sister filed multiple missing persons reports before suddenly dropping the matter entirely. According to rumors among the staff, the maid had last been seen entering the Whitmore estate during a private event before vanishing completely. Richard Whitmore denied knowing anything about her disappearance, and eventually the investigation faded away without answers. But now Evelyn could not stop thinking about one terrifying possibility. What if Laura Bennett had discovered the same secret hidden beneath that table? And what if the missing maid years earlier had discovered it too? That afternoon, Evelyn noticed Daniel Mercer arriving unexpectedly at the mansion carrying several thick folders into Richard Whitmore's office. 30 minutes later, Marcus Reed ordered all employees to surrender their phones temporarily for what he described as a security review. When Evelyn hesitated, Marcus stared at her long enough to make her pulse race. "They're just precautions," he said calmly. But Evelyn no longer believed anything inside that mansion was merely precaution. By evening, her fear had become impossible to ignore. Every hallway felt tense. Every conversation stopped when she entered rooms. Even Victoria Whitmore seemed disturbed, avoiding eye contact entirely while nervously taking medication from a small prescription bottle inside the kitchen. Then finally, just before Evelyn left for the night, her phone vibrated once inside her apron pocket. A message from another unknown number. Only 4 words appeared on the screen. "You saw too much." The message stayed on Evelyn Carter's phone screen for nearly a full minute before she finally deleted it. But even after the words disappeared, the fear remained. You saw too much. For simple words. No explanation. No signature. Yet somehow Evelyn already knew the warning was real. Whoever sent it wanted her frightened enough to stay silent. And for a brief moment, that plan almost worked. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her apartment long after Noah had fallen asleep, staring silently at the city lights outside her window while trying to convince herself to walk away from everything connected to the Whitmore family. She could quit the job, forget the photographs existed, pretend none of it had happened. But the more she thought about Laura Bennett and the other missing maid, the harder it became to ignore the terrible feeling growing inside her. Because if powerful people had truly hurt those women, staying silent would not protect anyone. It would only protect them. The next morning, Evelyn returned to the Whitmore mansion pretending everything was normal. She lowered her eyes, spoke carefully, cleaned quietly. But internally, something had changed. Fear was slowly being replaced by suspicion. And suspicion was becoming determination. For the first time since working there, Evelyn started paying attention to everything. She memorized security schedules, noticed which cameras rotated every 30 seconds and which hallways remained unwatched during shift changes. She observed when Richard Whitmore left the estate and how long Daniel Mercer stayed inside the private office upstairs. She listened carefully during conversations employees assumed servants could not understand. And slowly, pieces of something much darker began falling into place. Late one evening, while cleaning Richard Whitmore's office after another charity meeting, Evelyn noticed a filing cabinet drawer had been left slightly open. Inside were financial records connected to the Whitmore Foundation, Richard's highly respected charity organization. At first, the documents looked ordinary. Donation records, property transfers, corporate expenses. But several numbers immediately caught Evelyn's attention because the amounts made no sense. Millions of dollars had been transferred repeatedly between shell companies connected to properties Richard Whitmore technically did not own. Some records referenced warehouses near shipping ports along the East Coast. Others listed large payments tied to non-existent employee contracts. Evelyn quickly photographed everything she could using her phone before footsteps approached the hallway. Over the following days, she copied more documents carefully whenever opportunities appeared. Tax forms, shipping invoices, handwritten notes hidden inside folders Daniel Mercer carried between meetings. The deeper she looked, the worse everything became. Money laundering, fraudulent charities, illegal offshore accounts hidden beneath layers of fake business names. Yet one discovery disturbed her more than anything else. Several financial records contained coded references besides specific female employee names. Laura Bennett, Teresa Miles, and at least 4 other women Evelyn had never heard of before. At first, the meaning remained unclear. But after secretly searching public databases from the library near her apartment, Evelyn uncovered something terrifying. 3 of those women had been reported missing over the last 6 years in different states. None of the investigations led anywhere. Yet all 3 names appeared repeatedly inside Whitmore Foundation transportation records connected to private events and overseas travel. That was the moment Evelyn realized this was no longer simply about corruption or stolen money. Something far worse was happening behind the Whitmore family's public image. And somehow Richard Whitmore's charity foundation sat directly at the center of it. But the biggest shock came unexpectedly 2 nights later. Evelyn had stayed late organizing storage shelves near the downstairs hallway when she overheard a violent argument erupting inside Richard's private office upstairs. Ethan Whitmore sounded panicked. "You promised me nobody would find out," Ethan shouted. Richard answered immediately, his voice colder than Evelyn had ever heard before. "I have spent years protecting this family." Then Ethan said something that stopped Evelyn completely. "I never asked you to cover for me." Silence followed. A long, terrifying silence. And suddenly Evelyn understood something she had not considered before. Richard Whitmore was not protecting himself. He was protecting someone inside his own family. After that night, Ethan's behavior became increasingly unstable. He looked exhausted constantly. His hands shook during meals. Twice Evelyn saw him crying privately near the garage entrance before quickly wiping his face whenever employees approached. Meanwhile, Richard grew even more controlling inside the mansion. Marcus Reed increased overnight security patrols. Daniel Mercer arrived almost daily carrying new legal documents. And Victoria Whitmore seemed emotionally broken, drifting silently through the mansion like someone already expecting disaster. Then came the basement key. Evelyn discovered it accidentally hidden inside Richard's office desk while cleaning after another late-night meeting. Small, silver, marked only with a faded black tag labeled West Storage. Her pulse immediately quickened because deep down she already knew exactly which door the key belonged to. For nearly an hour she debated whether to put it back. Then she slipped it quietly into her apron pocket. That same night, police sirens suddenly echoed somewhere beyond the mansion gates while security guards rushed across the property, responding to an emergency Evelyn could not yet see. The chaos created exactly the distraction she needed. Heart pounding violently, Evelyn moved quickly down the West Wing hallway toward the locked basement corridor employees had feared for years. The hallway felt colder than the rest of the mansion, almost unnaturally quiet. As Evelyn approached the basement door, she noticed deep scratches near the lower frame as though someone had desperately tried clawing their way out at some point. Her breathing became uneven. Every instinct told her to turn around, but she kept moving. Slowly, she inserted the silver key into the lock. Behind her, distant voices shouted somewhere upstairs. Security radios crackled. Then came the sound of footsteps running through the mansion. Evelyn pushed the basement door open carefully. Darkness waited below, and as she finally stepped inside, the horrifying truth about the Whitmore family began revealing itself piece by piece. Because hidden beneath that mansion was the answer to why people had been disappearing for years. And Evelyn Carter was about to discover it alone. To be continued. If this story shocked you, then you already understand something most people ignore. The truth does not always come from the powerful people sitting at the center of the room. Sometimes it comes from the quiet person standing in the corner, watching everything unfold without anyone noticing. Inside the Whitmore mansion, Politicians raised glasses, wealthy guests smiled for cameras, and Richard Whitmore carefully protected the image he spent decades building. But in the end, the person who exposed the cracks in that perfect world was not a detective, a journalist, or a business rival. It was Evelyn Carter, a tired single mother carrying trays through crowded hallways while powerful people assumed she was invisible. Stories like this remind us how easily appearances can deceive us. Wealth can hide fear. Luxury can hide violence. And behind carefully rehearsed smiles, entire lives can collapse quietly without the outside world realizing anything is wrong until it is far too late. The frightening part is that situations like this happens more often than people want to believe. Real investigations across America have uncovered powerful families hiding abuse, corruption, financial crimes, and disappearances behind reputations built on money and influence. Sometimes the people closest to the truth are the workers nobody notices. The drivers, the assistants, the housekeepers, the maids, the ones expected to stay silent no matter what they see. And maybe that is why Evelyn Carter's story feels so disturbing. Because deep down, many people understand how easily ordinary lives can become trapped inside dangerous situations controlled by wealth and fear. One accidental moment changed everything for her. One spilled glass uncovered years of secrets hidden beneath polished floors and expensive chandeliers. And once Evelyn saw the truth, there was no way to unsee it. So before you leave, tell us honestly in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Evelyn Carter's position? Would you risk your safety to expose the truth? Or would fear keep you silent knowing powerful people were watching your every move? We really want to hear your thoughts because stories like this always leave people divided. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Mindwhisper Stories for more dark secrets, shocking betrayals, and real story-inspired mysteries that prove sometimes the people serving the drinks see everything.